Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa has emphasized the need to build South Africa's resilience within the international trading system. In his letter to the nation today, Ramaphosa focused on interventions that government is putting in place to mitigate the impact of the decision by the United States to impose a 30% tariff on South African imports last week. Now, he says the country cannot afford to be complacent in the face of increasingly turbulent headwinds and must adapt to these. All right, so let's now bring in FNB's agricultural economist, Paul Makube, just to help us unpack all of these developments. Thank you so much for your time and good afternoon to you, Paul. So the tariffs will take effect in less than a week. I mean, should there be no deal between South Africa and the US, we're told. We also understand that these tariffs threaten South Africa's 7.5% share of global exports that go to the United States. What is the likely short and long-term impact of the US tariffs on South Africa's citrus industry, particularly given what we heard earlier, that the counter-seasonal supply dynamic there?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good afternoon. Yes, the short-term impact is that on the industry itself, in terms of the farmers that are involved, especially in regions such as part of the Western Cape and Northern Cape that are likely to be particularly hit. We anticipate a situation where the short-term impact financially is quite huge, which with long-term implications for jobs. But in the long term, I think the strategy is that is to diversify and look at various markets, because if you look at it at the current moment, it's actually a moving target, because there are many factors that are influencing the decision to change tariffs. There are lingering issues such as, for example, the Russian war, the issues of BRICS and so on. So are we likely to see a deal finalized and then being reviewed in few months' time? It remains an uncertainty, but I think it is important that the negotiations continue to actually clinch a proper deal that takes into account the economic implications and the real relations with America with regard to how South African products actually impact on the American situation. I think you talked about non-cyclicality, especially in the agricultural sector. That is obviously the case. We don't necessarily compete with the local producers, so they're not at a disadvantage. So those issues have to be taken into account. But long term is looking at diversifying the markets and actually expediting trade negotiations with target markets.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been hearing that a lot in terms of other markets that, South Africa could possibly look at. And I want to stay on that. President Cyril Ramaphosa also in his letter says, there is a need rather to build South Africa's resilience within the international trading system. I mean, is South Africa's strategy to shift towards these markets, Asian, African, Middle Eastern markets even, enough to replace the lost trade volume with the US, do you think?
Well, there's a potential to, this market are quite huge. And I mean, if in a bigger scheme of things, South Africa, it's not necessarily, quite big in terms of, the volumes that we can produce. And if we properly open these markets, we can easily diversify and actually alleviate the pressure on certain markets. But I think what is important is for us to negotiate a deal and have a settlement that will benefit both the countries. And I think it all depends on the situation currently with regard to the geopolitical situation in the world. And once that settles, perhaps that will be a better situation for South Africa. Currently, those issues are actually overriding everything.
Yeah. And how feasible would it be then, for small to medium exporters, especially those in the citrus and perishable goods market, to move or to pivot quickly to these new markets?
Well, it is not going to be easy to pivot immediately to new markets. So you're looking at long term, not necessarily short term. For short term, it's going to be a tough situation to pivot for the smaller guys. But in the longer term, opening up those markets and creating opportunities and actually getting that kind of support will be very, very critical for them. But I think perhaps just to mention that it is also important that from a cost perspective and competitiveness, issues such as logistics, issues such as a favorable environment that will reduce costs for producers will actually go a long way in trying to alleviate pressure on industry players in terms of competitiveness on global markets.
Yeah, I mean, even during the press briefing, we heard that a lot of these exporters are going to need a lot of support, be it financial or otherwise. What practical support would exporters need then from government and even private sector players, to compete in these new markets, given, of course, those logistical challenges, tariff challenges, I would imagine, but also from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, we proceed from the premise that, there were, exports, continuing. It's a question of actually diverting into those markets and getting, that kind of support in terms of them getting, either consular support, but also in terms of, expediting or opening up, negotiations with trading partners to actually, increase trade with South Africa. The other support measures, I think we have learned from the COVID situation what measures can be put in place in terms of support for affected industries or affected players in terms of short-term situation in terms of jobs. As a result of the loss of market share in the short term, so those measures can be looked at, and government can try to find support measures to tailor specific support measures for certain industries, because they are differing in terms of impact.